Welcome, and thank you for being here. I'm Barbara Beauregard from AncestrySeeking.com. In this short session, I'm going to walk you through a simple and practical way to build a DNA proof argument without feeling overwhelmed or unsure of where to start. If you've ever looked at your DNA matches and thought, I know the answer is here somewhere, but I can't quite prove it yet, you're not alone. And this is exactly where many genealogists get stuck. What I'm going to share with you today is a clear framework you can follow, one that helps you move from scattered clues to a well supported conclusion you can actually explain with confidence. At some point in DNA research, we all reach a moment where the clues are there, but the answer still isn't clear. You may have a number of DNA matches that seem connected, but you're not sure exactly how. You might be looking at multiple possible parents or family lines, and everything seems to overlap just enough to be confusing. Or maybe the trees you're finding don't quite match up, and you're left wondering which direction is correct. That's where many researchers get stuck. But the issue usually isn't the lack of information, it's the lack of a clear, structured way to work through it. So, what is a DNA proof argument? A DNA proof argument may sound technical, but it's actually very straightforward. It's simply a clear explanation of four things: what you're trying to figure out, what evidence you've gathered, how that evidence connects together, and why your conclusion makes sense. It's not about writing something complicated or formal. It's about organizing your thoughts in a way that someone else, and just as importantly, you can follow. When you take the time to do this, your research becomes much clearer and much easier to trust. Many people hesitate at this stage because they think building a proof argument is something only experienced or professional genealogists can do, but that's really not the case. You don't need to be perfect, you don't need to know everything, and you don't need to have every piece of evidence. What you do need is a process, something you can follow step by step that helps you stay organized and keeps you from jumping to conclusions too quickly. Once you have that, everything becomes much more manageable. So, let me introduce the 5 step process we're going to walk through. First, define your question. Second, gather your evidence. Third, build a candidate list. Fourth, analyze and compare. And finally, write your conclusion. This framework gives you a path forward. Instead of feeling like you're chasing pieces of information in different directions, you're working through a structured process that leads you toward an answer. As we go through each step, think about how this might apply to a situation in your own research. Everything begins with a clear question. This step is more important than it might seem at first. If your question is vague or too broad, your research can quickly become scattered and overwhelming. Instead, try to focus on one specific question. For example, who is the biological parent of this individual? Or, how is this DNA match related to me? When your question is clear, it acts like a guide. It helps you decide what information is relevant and what isn't, and that alone can save you a tremendous amount of time. Once you have your question, the next step is to gather your evidence. This includes your DNA matches, your shared match lists, family trees, and any traditional records you've already collected. At this stage, your goal is not to decide what's correct. It's simply to collect and organize what you have. Think of this as laying everything out on the table so you can see the full picture. The more clearly you can see your information, the easier it will be to work with in the next steps. Now we move into one of the most important steps, building your candidate list. This is where you list all reasonable possibilities. For example, if you're trying to identify a parent, you might list multiple individuals who could fit based on age, location, and known connections. The key here is not to narrow things down too quickly. Include all realistic options, even if you're unsure. Then begin attaching evidence to each candidate. This step helps you move from guessing to comparing. Now, we begin to analyze and compare what we've gathered. This is where patterns start to appear. Ask yourself, which candidate fits the DNA evidence best? Do shared matches support one option more than another? Do the timelines and locations make sense? You may also notice conflicts, and that's okay. Conflicting evidence is part of the process. What matters is how all the pieces work together to support or weaken each possibility. This final step is the one many people skip, but it's the most powerful. Take the time to write out your conclusion, explain what you were trying to determine, what evidence you used, and why your conclusion makes sense. It doesn't need to be long or formal, just clear. If someone else can read your explanation and follow your reasoning, you've created a strong proof argument. And even more importantly, you've created something you can come back to later and still understand. There are a few common mistakes that can make this process more difficult than it needs to be. One is jumping to conclusions too quickly before all the evidence has been considered. Another is ignoring information that doesn't fit your theory. It's also very common to keep everything in your head instead of writing it down. And sometimes we overcomplicate things when a simple explanation would be clearer. If you focus on staying organized and being honest about the evidence, you'll avoid most of these pitfalls. Let's look at a simple example. Imagine you're trying to determine which of two individuals could be the correct parent in a DNA case. Both seem possible, but when you compare the DNA matches, one shows stronger, more consistent connections. When you combine that with the records and timelines, one option begins to stand out more clearly. This is how a proof argument develops, not from a single piece of evidence, but from how everything fits together. To help make this process easier, I created a simple DNA proof argument worksheet. It walks you step by step through everything we've just covered. You can use it to define your question, track your DNA matches, build your candidate list, and write your conclusion. Having something like this in front of you helps you stay focused and organized, especially when things start to feel complicated. This process also connects closely to my time capsule method. You're not just solving a research problem, you're telling a story, identifying what matters, making your findings accessible, and sharing them thoughtfully and responsibly. DNA research can reveal meaningful and sometimes sensitive information. Taking the time to document your reasoning helps ensure that your work is both accurate and respectful. You don't need perfect evidence to move forward. What you need is a clear and thoughtful process. When you take the time to organize your findings and explain your reasoning, you turn uncertainty into understanding, and that's what allows you to make real progress in your research. If you'd like to try this process for yourself, I encourage you to use the worksheet and apply it to one of your own research questions. And if you'd like more guidance, resources, or examples, you can visit ancestryseeking.com. Thank you again for joining me today. I hope this gives you a clear and approachable way to begin building your own DNA proof arguments and helps you feel more confident as you move forward in your DNA research.